HUD resources, disability laws, and reasonable accommodations. Fair housing enforcement extends beyond HUD. Throughout this chapter, we've discussed how fair housing complaints are investigated and how violations can lead to administrative actions or civil litigation. Fortunately, HUD does much more than investigate complaints. The agency also provides education, funding, training, and support to help housing providers, real estate professionals, and consumers understand their rights and responsibilities before problems occur. These programs encourage voluntary compliance and promote equal housing opportunities throughout the country. HUD's Fair Housing Assistance Programs. Although HUD administers the Federal Fair Housing Act, many states, including Arizona, have agencies that enforce substantially equivalent fair housing laws. HUD works closely with these state and local agencies to improve fair housing enforcement and consumer education. Some of HUD's primary assistance programs include the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, FHIP, which provides funding to nonprofit organizations that investigate complaints, educate the public, conduct testing, and promote fair housing awareness. The Fair Housing Assistance Program, FHAP, which supports state and local agencies responsible for investigating fair housing complaints under substantially equivalent state laws. Together, these programs strengthen fair housing enforcement while helping consumers understand their legal rights before discrimination occurs. Understanding the Americans with Disabilities Act. Many real estate professionals confuse the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and the Fair Housing Act. Although both laws protect individuals with disabilities, they serve different purposes. The ADA generally applies to places of public accommodation, commercial facilities, government buildings, and areas of apartment communities that are open to the public, such as leasing offices and common areas. The Fair Housing Act, on the other hand, primarily governs housing providers and requires reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications when appropriate for individuals with disabilities. Understanding which law applies helps avoid confusion during real estate transactions. Reasonable accommodations. One of the most common accommodation requests involves assistance animals. As we discussed earlier, assistance animals are not considered pets under the Fair Housing Act. Instead, they may qualify as a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability. Housing providers generally may request reliable documentation supporting the disability-related need for an assistance animal only when the disability or the need for the accommodation is not readily apparent. The goal is to verify the need for the accommodation, not to obtain unnecessary medical information. Housing providers should avoid creating policies that make accommodation requests unnecessarily burdensome. Learning from past enforcement actions. Several fair housing enforcement actions have involved housing providers whose accommodation policies required excessive paperwork, unnecessary medical records, repeated renewals, or restrictions that effectively discouraged individuals from requesting reasonable accommodations. These cases serve as reminders that fair housing compliance is not simply about having a written policy. The policy itself must also be reasonable, consistently applied, and compliant with federal law. Disabilities take many forms. Disabilities are not always visible. Some individuals have physical disabilities that require mobility accommodations. Others may have sensory, developmental, intellectual, behavioral, or mental health disabilities. Conditions such as anxiety disorders, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and many other mental health conditions may qualify as disabilities when they substantially limit one or more major life activities. Because every situation is unique, housing providers should avoid making assumptions based upon appearance or diagnosis. Instead, each accommodation request should be evaluated individually. Creating a culture of compliance. The best fair housing policies accomplish two goals. They protect the rights of individuals with disabilities while providing housing providers with clear procedures for evaluating accommodation requests fairly and consistently. When everyone understands the process, misunderstandings become less common and disputes are far less likely to occur. Broker tip. If you receive a request for a reasonable accommodation and are unsure how to proceed, don't guess. Consult your designated broker, property owner, legal counsel, or current HUD guidance before denying the request. Taking a few extra minutes to verify the proper procedure may prevent an expensive fair housing complaint. Online discussion question. Why is it important to understand the difference between the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act? Answer. Although both protect individuals with disabilities, they apply in different situations. Understanding which law governs a particular situation helps ensure compliance. Question. Why shouldn't housing providers create overly burdensome accommodation procedures? Answer. Complicated or unnecessary requirements may discourage individuals from requesting reasonable accommodations and could create fair housing concerns. Question: why should accommodation requests be evaluated individually? Every disability and every accommodation request is unique. Individual review helps ensure decisions are based on the specific facts rather than assumptions.